Characters being randomly absent in a recurring feature or of lazy licensed comics, although he does pop in up in the tech stories. The Cobra to the Force of Freedom's G.I. Joe were a handful of generic bad guys called Savage. There are profiles of them as well. None of them are particularly interesting, apart from a guy called Gripper who has an incredibly lame-looking claw instead of a hand. He even has a really sad expression in his portrait in the profile, limply holding up his claw, trying to look menacing. I genuinely feel sorry for him. They also have their own ninja called Black Dragon, who is a ninja who dresses in black. It's absolutely not anything like Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow from G.I. Joe, not at all. G.I. Joe Snake Eyes was the good guy, and he was the ninja that dressed in black. The Rambo Force of Freedom, the good guy, is dressed in white. See, it's completely different. Ha ha. All these profiles were weirdly list the guns of each of them carry in worrying detail. I get that Turbo would carry guns, but listing that his favorite weapons are a Walter pistol and a .30 cal machine gun in a book for kids just seems a bit weird, especially considering this is British and we definitely don't have the US gun culture. There's even coloring in pages where instead of coloring Rambo or Gripper or whatever, kids can color the AK-47 assault rifle, the cheap and reliable gun of choice for both terrorists and freedom fighters from Time magazine, an AGS-17 grenade launcher or a 25mm GE anti-aircraft gun. Apart from a board game from a book based on a cartoon, based on a sequel to a film based on a novel by David Morrell about a violent man suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, the rest of the annual is filled with comic strips and prose stories. As you might expect, they are simple, lightweight stuff aimed at about the cognitive level of an 8-year-old. What I wasn't expecting was the level of politics. The Rambo series, while obviously action films on their most basic level, have always had a degree of current international political substance for them. First Blood was obviously a post-Vietnam story, and he returned to Nam in the sequel. By the third one, all of the integrity of Morrell's original novel might have been shed. In more ways than one. If you're watching tonight's show, we show you the whole timeline here. You can definitely see in more ways than one. Where was I? Sorry, guys. Alright. By a third of all the integrity of Morrell's original novel have been shed, but it's still highly politically charged, just in a completely different way. It's a commie-bashing piece of jingoistic propaganda where Rambo basically teams up with the Taliban. The belated third sequel even turned its focus on the then-current situation of Burma. While you wouldn't expect the violence of this movie to be transferred to a book for children, and it doesn't, you equally would expect the politics to be shorn as well. But you're wrong. So Rambo the Force of Freedom was a rather obvious G.I. Joe ripoff, yet G.I. Joe Cobra Commander's schemes were always about 2 steps divorced from reality, like forming an evil glam metal band or hosting an evil telethon. What's the first mission for the Force of Freedom in the annual? The U.S. covertly manipulating regime against change in a South American country. Yay. The first comic in the book, Castrell's Last Stand, focuses on the fictional country of Galliard. There's a lot of fictional Latin America and Middle Eastern countries in this book. The unarmed president of Galliard has turned to Colonel Troutman to help, as his cousin Hector is threatened to overthrow him within 5 years, a weirdly specific time frame, but whatever. He's nearly reached the 5th anniversary of his presidency, so the Force of Freedom arrived just as Castell forcefully takes over the radio station. Because they couldn't get it off the ground 4 years earlier, right? This all happens on the first page. Let's break down what this is telling us. One dictator is being supported over another, and the second world nation is being manipulated by white Westerners for seemingly their own ends. There is no information given about why the president is more valorous than his cousin. We are just told he is. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, and I don't want to go off on an anti-American rant or anything, but those who are inclined could compare this to any amount of shady CIA goings on over the last 50 years. I was about to just make that point. And Castrell's first reaction, or act of aggression, take over the local state-controlled media. All things considered, that's pretty solid plan of action. Again, this is heady stuff for a book for 8-year-olds. Even if the story ends with Rambo juggling with a bomb, like Adam West in the 1966 Batman film. Sometimes you can't get it. Some days you just can't get rid of a bomb. But the most dubious rhetoric comes in the penultimate story of the annual, a prose tale entitled Killing Graham. The basic plot, not that there's any depth to the plotting, revolves around Savage trying to infiltrate the official reopening of Centra, City of the Future. The story is just some weak espionage claptrap, but the description of Centura is fascinating. Colonel Chapman is very complimentary about its founder, President Radcliffe. It's hauling his unnamed country out of the Dark Ages in just one generation. Turbo, the weapons expert Cypher's character, pipes up asking him why they didn't build a city in the middle of the jungle. Chapman's response is baffling stuff for a children's book. Radcliffe's idea is to expand the country's economy as fast as possible. His aim is to develop the country's interior as far as Centura by the end of the century. Centura may be in the middle of the jungle now, but in 20 years' time he hopes it will be in the heart of the world's leading nations. Snake Eyes clone White Dragon then asks him why they are having such a big opening event. Radcliffe doesn't have the funds to finance the whole deal. The oil finds off to the east paid for the building of Centura, but he's going to need heavy foreign investment to put the rest of his dream into operation. Centura will show these superpowers he means business. Remember when everyone criticized George Lucas for opening the Star Wars prequels with an opening crawl trade agreements? This is about 1,000,000 times worse. Let alone thinking about the dubious ecological messages, the jungle ecosystem isn't going to last long, and the terrible grasp of city planning, had Rambo and the Force of Freedom continued into the mid-90s, I'm pretty sure would have led an elite tactical squad to topple Radcliffe because the West took a fancy to Centura's oil. Damn true, that one. But enough about politics. Does the annual provide much Rambo-based excitement and badassery? There's a text story called Castle of Dogs, which I had high hopes for. There's a great splash page of Rambo wrestling an Alsatian, and I really hoped it was just going to be 6 pages of Rambo battling rabid dogs, which would have been awesome. Sadly, it's not really. They just run around and bark a bit, though Rambo does hit one of them with a big stick. Probably the stick fighting stick. Anyway, there is the awesome I was hoping for in the comic strip entitled Gun Run, though. It opens with a guy carrying the coffins of deceased relatives through a checkpoint of yet another fictional country, this time called Pradslava. However, when he gets through, it turns out the coffins are actually full of smuggled guns. In the single best moment of the whole book, Rambo then bursts out of one of the coffins and attacks the gun runners, revealing he'd been hiding there all along. He even shouts out, "What were you expecting, Dracula?" And there's a picture of it here where one of Savage's guys open the coffin and Rambo pops out and grabs him, and then Savage is like, or Havoc, sorry, is like, "Rambo, And then Rambo says, "You got that right, Havoc. Were you expecting Dracula?" Anyway. However, this plan doesn't really seem very thought out. He gets trapped in their compound, lamenting getting here was the easy bit, getting out is the problem. If you know that they were smuggling guns over the border, wouldn't you have just intercepted them so you could make sure they never got to their intended destination and cause harm? As opposed to some frivolous coffin-based antics. If you would have been, it would have been a lot simpler as well. It's fine though. Rambo blows up a boat and escapes. So yeah, that's the Rambo Annual 1988. It's pretty crazy. Apparently, there was also a 1987 annual with which Googling shows had much more realistic looking picture of Stallone on the cover. I have no idea what was in that, but there's probably less about city planning. So there you have it. The Rambo 1988 Child's Activity Book, the 1988 Rambo Children's Annual.